Support for UWM podcasts comes from University School of Milwaukee, fulfilling a values-based mission of developing learners, fostering leaders, and preparing citizens for pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. More information at usm.org/mission.
From 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR, this is Lake Effect. I'm Joy Powers. Today we'll learn about a Milwaukee art gallery that's at risk of closing. Then we'll celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the discovery of gravitational waves and learn how UW-Milwaukee continues to build on this discovery.
We're effectively using black holes in space as a really extreme laboratory to test our most fundamental physics theories, which again is incredibly powerful, incredibly exciting, and not something that we were able to do just a few years ago.
Plus, we'll explore the life and legacy of politician and civil rights activist Vel Phillips.
So she says to the senator, well, how can you expect the world to, respect us if we don't even enforce equality here at home?
All of that is coming up on Lake Effect. This is Lake Effect from 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. I'm Joy Powers, and thank you so much for joining us. A Black-owned art gallery in Milwaukee is at risk of closing. Fatima Laster purchased the building in 2018, hoping to make a communal space for underrepresented artists. Since then, hundreds of artists have come through the doors of the 5 Points Art Gallery. Laster acquired the building through the City of Milwaukee's Art and Resource Community Hub Loan Program, also known as ARCH. She's now in talks with her lender, the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, about restructuring the terms of her loan. She's also launched a fundraising campaign to help with a large mortgage payment due on December 1st. Laster joins WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell to talk about the gallery and how she's trying to make sure it stays open.
5 Points Art Gallery and Studios is what I call an amalgamation of all my life practices. Is the visual arts component, it's the interior design component, it's the general contracting component, and it is the curatorial and space making component. And so it was born of a need of needing a live home workspace. I went through the city to acquire the foreclosed funeral home. It used to be the Johnson Goolsby Funeral Home and Services, which is in my childhood neighborhood, which is Harambe, 5 Points area. I sought to make it this communal but home space for underrepresented artists that I was meeting, and including myself, through travels and wondering why these phenomenal people and artists weren't getting the looks and opportunities to exhibit and have access to more career opportunities in the arts versus who I was seeing in the spaces I was being led to, like who we consider like a stable museum or gallery to go to.
How much can you share about what it took to buy the place, just like the steps and what culminated into 5 Points Art Gallery and Studios?
Some of the stuff was happenstance. So I knew at the time when I was looking for a live home workspace, I drove past the building and I said, oh, I wonder what that's about. I wonder if I can make that. It's bigger than what I thought it was from the outside looking in. And then I approached the city about acquiring it and considering it for the ARCH program, which is like artist resource housing. And it's like artist-based housing and practices. And so I went to the city. They said, okay, for consideration, but I had to do the financial stuff, projections, securing financing to rehab it atop of like trying to get the small grant that they gave towards it, putting up my own money. You had to put in your own capital and do like a half match. So it wasn't like easy, but it might be more streamlined now. But yeah, those were some of the steps. And so once the city kind of said, okay, we'll green light you, and I did renderings for how I wanted to rehab the space, and I had to tell them how I wanted to utilize the space, and I had been in it, so I already had the apartments, and I knew I needed to live there, so I was going to live there, and then I also had, it's a second apartment. I knew I wanted to do like a shared artist housing just based off my experience with traveling. I used to, before it became what it is, do Airbnbs and hostels and stay with a lot of people and artists when I would travel to cut expenses, but also get a more enriching and like authentic experience in the spaces that I would travel to. So I knew that I wanted that component to provide as like a resource, a financial resource, and also a business and networking connection resource. And then when I knew I wanted this to be at a gallery. As soon as I opened the doors for the first time and I saw the openings of the space, I was like, yep, this is going to be like my own little Harlem Renaissance space. And I knew I needed work studios. I needed a work studio for myself. And then I was just thinking about all the people I could bring in to create this buzzing, supportive, creative, uplifting space. And then the culinary kitchen is a part of it as well. I believe in breaking bread. When I was growing up, sometimes people didn't have money to compensate you for helping. So it's like, let me feed you. Trading. And so that's essentially the core of this. It's like this trading resource space, this safe space where you can come develop, have security, have protection against exploitation that goes on to artists in the outside world. That's the core. We've planted fruit trees on the outside. Like, we're trying to battle all the issues in one space. And we have food insecurity issues, the housing insecurity and vulnerability that got revealed more when I wasn't fully prepared, but I knew, like, things need to be affordable. But that's been the biggest challenges too, is reducing already truly affordable prices to make it even more accessible and account for the housing issues that were being brought to my door when people wanted to, stay.
You've talked about, like, this space has really been a hub for creatives, creating access. And I guess we can transition now to the fact that the space is in a tough situation right now. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So as I mentioned, I acquired this space through the ARCH program through the city, which is supposed to provide permanent housing for artists, but also with a community-facing component. But with the caveat, like, you had to go get financing from a lender to do whatever rehabbing or what have you. I ended up getting a few offers, but I went with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation as my lender, which is a philanthropy group. Given what they projected their mission is, being community-driven, offsetting disparities in underserved neighborhoods, and having a strong arts focus and investment. And then their lending rate was the cheapest. Knowing that the programming was for permanent housing, like, I'm living here. I'm living with my grandmother now, but I'm moving everything in here. The only thing was offered was a 5-year loan. 5 years went by and goes by very quickly, and then otherwise the hope was that it would refinance with somebody else, or you got to pay a balloon payment. That was in 2018. Since then, the financial and economic environment has been nuts. We went through the pandemic, and we are still feeling the effects of that, where even the gallery had to shut down because it wasn't considered an essential business, lost contracts that way. And then going into this year with the changing of administration, a lot of suppressed financing and the shutdown of arts funding. So I lost contracts that way. But going through the years, it's like you're doing all this work for the community. You're serving a very vulnerable population, whether it's artists or families, the rising cost of everything, and then competing with, like, the reduction in rents or whatever I could charge from the businesses or artists or even the residents. It just didn't match. And that's where, like, all the monthly payments have been made. I have another job right now too, so I've worked myself to support this. So it hasn't been like, oh, she's ever missed a monthly payment. It's like, time's up. It's 5 years. Now I'm in an extended period, but now it's 7 years. Where's this money? And I've asked, I was like, this is my home. These are the people I service. You will be displacing us if you take the house. Is there possible for extension? It's like, no, we need to be paid back.
The conversation, this is with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation.
Yes. This is with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. I'm satisfied with the city, like my obligation with them, but it's a partnership with them, like the city and whomever the lender is. Okay. Like the city paid the lender money towards my loan to pay it down. Like that was a part of the grants that I initially brought in. Okay. And I asked if it could be done differently because you're not a traditional lender. Like you can do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. And here's your opportunity to do whatever you want. And here's your opportunity to really serve more than me. Like there are more than me in this neighborhood who can like activate a space, be community facing, start and grow a business. But some clemency needs to be accounted for too, given the environment and what the contributions that are being made and the work that's being done. So contractually, they can do whatever they want. And I've acknowledged that. How do you displace somebody from their neighborhood, their physical house, the community? And it's not even just me. It's like all these 5,000 visitors who are like, no, we need you. Or these artists who are residing here, like, where am I going to go? What we got to do? We have to save this. And like, this is a home, like for their business and their physical selves too. And so I don't know. That's where we are. I'm trying to see if there can be some extension in terms like, okay, you are different. You're not a lender, traditional lender. Can we do differently? Can I stay here? Can we extend into a more traditional 20 to 30 year mortgage where I can keep making payments to you? And whenever I had more, I paid more, so I will keep doing that. Mm-hmm. And I've never missed a payment, so I'll pay and you'll know I'll do anything to pay. Like, my story is probably similar to the story of the houses around me. Like, everyone is just working to make those needs met. The difference is my loan is structured to be a commercial loan, even though even most businesses don't make it 5 years. So it's just a way to take, okay, thank you for doing what you've done so far. Now we'll take it from here and we'll sell it off cheaply to somebody who can afford it. And that's another way to change in the neighborhood and the landscape and the dynamics within the area too. So that's where we're at.
If we're in an alternate universe where this physical space of 5 Points Art Gallery and Studios is no more, have you thought about what the next iteration of it will be?
No, because now and then it's like I need to sleep. That's what I don't know. They're like, you're gonna do some with art. It's gonna be some art. Will it be the same iteration? I can't say yes because I'm 7 years in. The cost of everything is different. So the accessibility at the time too, I can't even tell you I will be able to acquire something to, and it's not about doing something identically, but even acquire something where I can even come close to the capacity building and offerings that this building has provided and what I've been able to offer people. So I don't know. I'm doing what I didn't even know I would be doing too. So I'll just keep moving and just see how the opportunities that come.
So I want to allow you to share any kind of final thoughts that you may have, but I do want to put a question in there too to be like, what Milwaukee, Wisconsin, even the international, art community stands to lose if 5 Points Art Gallery is gone?
You will be losing true, authentic threads, cultural threads of the city that people don't even really know how much talent is here. And they don't even know how much color is here until they come here. And they're like, and so it would be a true erasure of talent, prowess, cultural advancement, innovation, and something that's really indicative of what community, I'm not even talking about in this space, but a neighborhood can sustain and be about. That's what you'll be losing. A good example of somebody who really love they block and their neighborhood and their city.
Fatima Laster is the owner of Milwaukee's 5 Points Art Gallery and Studios. She spoke with WUWM's race and ethnicity reporter Taryn Powell. You can find information on how to support the gallery at WUWM.com. And did you know you can listen to Lake Effect as a podcast? Search for Lake Effect wherever you get your podcasts to download and listen on demand. Later in the show, our tour of Yemeni coffee shops continues with a stop at a local family-run business. But first, we'll learn how UW-Milwaukee played a key role in the discovery of gravitational waves. That's coming up on Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. You're listening to Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. It's been just over a decade since the game-changing discovery of gravitational waves in the distant universe. Gravitational waves are ripples in space-time caused by cosmic collisions. By processing massive amounts of data, UW-Milwaukee scientists played key roles in the discovery, contributing to a Nobel Prize in Physics. The discovery of gravitational waves opened a new door of study, and this work continues in our backyard today. To learn more about the significance of this anniversary and the new discoveries it's led to, Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski speaks with UWM Physics and Astronomy Assistant Professor Leah Medeiros.
It's been a decade since the groundbreaking detection of gravitational waves. So before we get into its significance and why it's important, let's start with some basics and definitions. What are gravitational waves?
So to understand gravitational waves, we have to understand just a little bit of Einstein's theory of gravity. And what Einstein's theory of gravity says is that we all live in a four-dimensional space, and that is called space-time. So we have three dimensions of space, but we are also moving through time as well. And Einstein's theory really does require that we think about space and time as two parts of the same thing. And what this theory states is that mass can actually curve space-time itself, which I know might sound a little counterintuitive, but what we experience as gravity actually fundamentally is the curvature of space-time itself. And then in turn, the curvature of space-time tells matter how to move. And so the way that I like to define a black hole, for example, is that a black hole is a region of space-time where the curvature is so extreme that nothing can escape, not even light itself. And so when we're talking about gravitational waves, most come from the merger of two black holes. It doesn't have to be black holes, but that's what most of them are. So since black holes curve space-time, if they are spiraling around each other and merging into one bigger black hole, effectively two black holes will collide into each other and create a bigger black hole. As they are spiraling around each other, they effectively drag that space-time curvature that they're creating with themselves as they move, and that effectively creates these ripples in space-time itself that propagate outward at the speed of light. And so we can actually detect these very, very, very tiny ripples in space-time itself. Space actually contracts and expands just ever so slightly, and we can actually detect that.
So from what I'm understanding, gravitational waves, maybe I'm thinking too large scale, it's like the ripples are the waves, right? These little detections that you're picking up from these black holes colliding.
Yeah, so what we actually detect as the gravitational waves is a really, really incredibly tiny effect. What's really funny, I think, if you look historically, is that the scientific papers that were published about gravitational waves originally, even in those papers, they effectively acknowledge the fact that this is an interesting calculation and it's an interesting result, but there's just absolutely no hope of us ever detecting that. It's just a curiosity. And so it's really, really incredible to kind of look back historically and to realize that we have really surpassed the expectations of those scientists so many years ago when they first discovered that the theory of general relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity, predicted these gravitational waves.
Yeah, and it's really exciting to live and see the progress and see it continue on further. So, to go back to the discovery, the detection of gravitational waves, how were they discovered and how did UWM play a role in this?
Yeah, so UWM has been really important and really influential in the field of gravitation since the 70s. We've had a lot of really important professors and scientists who worked at UWM contribute really significantly to this field. And so since the 1970s, we had here Leonard Parker, who worked on gravitation, and his work actually laid the foundation for Hawking's theory of Hawking radiation, which is incredibly influential and important. And then in the 90s, we had John Friedman and Bruce Allen, who also really, really influential and important in the field of gravitational waves. And in the 90s, UWM made a really major commitment to gravitational wave research and hired three additional professors, Alan Wiseman, Julian Creighton, and Patrick Brady, all of whom are still here and very active to this day. And with these new hires in the 90s, UWM was able to build one of the strongest theory groups within the LIGO collaboration. And LIGO, of course, is an international collaboration that detected gravitational waves for the first time, and it has thousands of members globally.
And LIGO stands for?
LIGO stands for Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. And effectively, LIGO is made up of actual instruments here on Earth that are the interferometers, and they detect really, really tiny infinitesimal expansion or contraction of space-time itself. And through that detection are able to learn a lot about the black holes that actually collided and generated these gravitational waves.
So it's really cool and interesting and widely unknown, maybe unfairly, that we have this massive hub of black hole and gravitational discovery in our backyard, and that UWM is one of the key places for this. You mentioned LIGO. There's also a couple other groupings at the CGCA Center that contribute to this kind of work. Let's address some of that, and starting with nanograv. This is specifically for pulsars. Can you explain the work that nanograv does?
Yeah, so LIGO detects gravitational waves from black hole mergers of black holes that are, maybe on the order of 10 to 100 or so times the mass of the sun. And nanograv uses different techniques and can detect mergers of what we call supermassive black holes that have millions or even billions of times the mass of the sun. And the way that nanograv actually does that is instead of having a physical instrument here on Earth, they use these really, really kind of crazy, incredibly compact stars called pulsars. And by measuring the time delay for the light that reaches the Earth from these pulsars, they can actually detect gravitational waves coming from mergers of supermassive black holes. And then more recently, just within 2025, I've also joined the CGCA and joined UWM, and I work on the Event Horizon Telescope. And that's also a global large-scale collaboration that focuses on gravity and black hole research. And what we do is we use a collection of telescopes spread around the world to take images of black holes and also learn more about black holes themselves and gravity through these images.
So this discovery 10 years ago opened a whole new door, a whole new field into gravitational wave astronomy and the wide array of physics to test and have in this hub. So can you share what kind of information gravitational waves and gravity and black holes do they hold that wasn't found in other space objects that makes this discovery so significant and has opened up these new doors?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. The way that I like to talk about this actually is kind of from my personal experience of how I've grown up within this field. When I started my PhD, I wanted to use black holes in space to test our understanding of gravity itself. And that just wasn't something that humans had ever done before. And the very first detection of gravitational waves happened when I was in the first few years of my PhD. And that really did kind of mark the dawn of a new era of black hole astrophysics. And since then, we have just learned so much about gravity itself, but also learned so much about the kinds of black holes that are out there, what their mass distributions are, how frequently they merge, how they grow, how they evolve. Just so much information. It's really been kind of like night and day before and after these free collaborations that I mentioned earlier came online and had their first detections. So, it's kind of a new subfield of astrophysics that we're all very excited about. And of course, UWM is playing a really, really significant role in this new field. And it really is just, we're effectively using black holes in space as a really extreme laboratory to test our most fundamental physics theories, which again is incredibly powerful, incredibly exciting, and not something that we were able to do just a few years ago.
Could you highlight for me maybe one or two other discoveries that were made possible because of the detection of gravitational waves?
Yeah, so I'll mention a couple things. So, one of the things that's really, really powerful and exciting for us is the fact that we were able to show that gravitational waves travel at the speed of light. Because they travel at the speed of light, it actually is a really powerful constraint on our understanding of gravity itself, and it shows that Einstein's theory of gravity does seem to really precisely predict the reality of the universe. So that's really, really incredible. Something else that's been really exciting for us is the fact that before the very first gravitational wave detection, we had never actually really directly detected a binary black hole. And so when I say binary black hole, what I mean is just two black holes orbiting around each other. And so the very first detection also signified the very first time that we were really able to show that black holes do actually orbit each other, and it is possible for them to merge into one bigger black hole.
It's amazing learning more about black holes because they're always, for the general population, seen in movies, big, ominous things, right? And then the science of learning more and breaking it down, and also the fact that gravitational waves confirmed E equals mc squared 100 years after Einstein wrote it out. As the newest faculty of the CGCA, what are you most excited about? What are you looking forward to in your new role here in Milwaukee?
I'm really excited for a few results that I am currently working on with my collaboration. So we published the first image of a black hole on April 10th of 2019. And then we published the first ever image of the black hole at the center of our own galaxy in 2022. And I was very involved in both of those results. And in 2023, I published an updated version of that very first image. And in that updated version, what I did was I reanalyzed the raw data that we get from the telescopes with a machine learning algorithm. And I was able to achieve effectively a factor of 2 improvement in resolution for that image, which is really exciting. If you're interested, the algorithm is called Primo, and you can find a lot of information online about that. And so what I'm personally excited about is that I'm about to publish a new version of Primo that has a lot of new capabilities, and I hope in the next few years will allow us to have a high resolution movie of a black hole so that we can really see how matter swirls around the black hole and learn a lot more about how matter interacts with the gravitational field of the black hole and how it falls in.
That sounds awesome. I look forward to having you back when you have these updated images to talk more about it. But for today, thank you so much for joining me to talk about the anniversary of gravitational waves.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Leah Medeiros is an assistant professor at UW-Milwaukee in the Physics and Astronomy Department. She's also a member of the Center for Gravitation, Cosmology, and Astrophysics, also known as CGCA. Medeiros joined Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski to talk about gravitational waves. If you'd like to dive into more outer space, the CGCA is hosting an event tonight that addresses the age-old question, are we alone in the universe? You can find more information about the event at WUWM.com. There's a Yemeni coffee shop boom happening in Milwaukee. 5 have opened in the last year. And this week, we're taking you on a tour of these shops. They offer drinks made with Yemeni coffee beans and are open late into the night. Most of these coffee shops are part of national franchises. But WUWM's Maiyan Silver and Eddie Morales bring us the story of a local shop that is independent and family-run.
Hey, I'm Maiyan Silver.
I'm Eddie Morales.
Where are we, Eddie?
We're at Al Wadi Coffee House.
Nice. Okay, and what area is this? We're kind of a stone's throw from the Milwaukee International Airport.
Yeah, we're about 2nd and Layton right now, just next to the car wash. And we've been to a couple of Yemeni coffee shops, and the ingredients that they use, the intentionality behind the way that it's created, the history behind it, it is a very specific experience when you go to a Yemeni coffee shop.
Nice. And we're going to go in and kind of drink our way through this shop and see kind of what some of the offerings they have are and what got them into business.
I'm excited. Let's go.
Let's go.
Inside Al Wadi, there's a color theme of black, white, and gold. Antique-looking light fixtures emit orange glows on the dark ceiling and white floor. Mayan, how would you describe the decorations?
There are shelves with elaborate gold coffee pots. There's Turkish-style seating with decorative cushions against the walls. Murals depict landscapes from Yemen, Turkey, Palestine, and Saudi Arabia.
The owners are brothers Mohammed and Mohaned Musaitif. With such similar names, Mohammed told us they usually go by their nicknames.
I go by Zaim as well, just like our family name, and then sometimes, he goes by Mo.
Oh, okay, he gets Mo, you don't get Mo?
No, he stole it from me.
Dang.
Mo approaches our table with drinks.
All right, we have the famous banana bread latte right here. And then on the right, we have the Adani chai, or some people call it kara. It's a very smooth, like black tea with milk. And it has spices infused in it, like cardamom and ginger.
First, we try the Adani chai.
Be honest.
Okay, here we go. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hot. It's really hot, but it's really good.
It's fresh.
Yes, it's really good.
Next up, the banana bread latte.
It's ice cold. As hot as the Adani is, the banana latte is cold. It looks great. It's tall, creamy with a cookie on top.
The brothers are big into coffee. So when Yemeni coffee shops started popping up, Zaim and Mo felt it was time to open one.
They thought of opening a franchise, but decided to start their own business. The menu includes traditional Yemeni recipes. But the brothers consider Al Wadi to be more of a Middle Eastern coffee house.
Zaim says that allows them to better serve the diverse Muslim and Arab community in the area. Zaim and Mo were born in the U.S. Their parents emigrated from Palestine in their 20s. They wanted that background reflected in their shop, which is one reason why they decided not to join an existing franchise.
But yeah, just because we didn't have to be confined, like those kind of rules and regulations by, a specific entity or franchise, we just kind of like the idea of going broadly with the Middle East. And, we also wanted to show our Palestinian heritage, especially with the things going on over in Palestine and Gaza. We just really wanted to make sure that we put that all out there and displayed some of that.
They're happy with the result, but not having franchise oversight means it's up to them to solve problems. They rely on family to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, their mother and sisters help when the shop gets busy. Mo has a background in construction. Mayan, you asked a good question about what that dynamic is like.
What do you feel like you each bring to the table as brothers going into business with each other?
Zaim answers first.
It's easy. I'll talk for him. He's super handy, so that's always super nice. Like, he can do a lot of the stuff that we need to do as far as, that construction or renovation, something just needs a quick repair, he steps in with that. He's also better with technology than me, I'll admit it. So he helps me out a little bit with that as well.
Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree. He's more of the more organized and structured with that kind of stuff than I am, to be honest. So.
But it's been nice for you both to rely on each other then.
Yeah, of
Oh,
course.
definitely, yeah.
The things that I lack in business, he picks up the slack and vice versa. So that's pretty good.
Al Wadi is continuing to evolve. They recently even added a drive-thru.
Now, they're serving fall-themed drinks like the pumpkin pie horchata latte and salted maple shaken espresso.
That was WUWM's Eddie Morales and Maiyan Silver, reporting from Al Wadi Coffee House. Our Yemeni Coffee series continues tomorrow, when Eddie and Maiyan will visit the Kawa House in Oak Creek. Coming up, we'll learn how pioneering politician Vel Phillips impacted Wisconsin and the nation. That's next on Lake Effect, on 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR. This is Lake Effect on 89.7 WUWM. I'm Joy Powers. Milwaukee politician Vel Phillips died in 2018 at the age of 94. Phillips started her career in the 1950s and became a lot of firsts. She was the first Black person and first woman to serve on the Milwaukee Common Council. She was the first Black person elected to a statewide office in Wisconsin. And she was the first Black person elected to the Democratic Party's National Committee. From pioneering open housing legislation to serving as Wisconsin's Secretary of State, Phillips had a major influence on our state and beyond. Last year, she was recognized with a statue at the state capitol and a plaza here in Milwaukee. Writer Barbara Miner explores Phillips' life and career for an article in Milwaukee Magazine. She joins Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski to share more.
We're talking about a very important woman today, Vel Phillips. And obviously a lot of people, especially locally, are familiar with Vel's accomplishments in her political career. But can you share more about her early years and her background?
Very complicated, and Val was a complicated person. I mean, her very early background, she was born in Milwaukee, raised here in Milwaukee, but her parents were part of what was then sort of the established African-American community. Her father was a small businessman, restaurant, garage owner. So Val grew up in relative, and I say that very loosely, relative comfort. And in fact, she talks about in her very early years when she went door to door with the League of Women Voters and was just horrified at some of the conditions. And she said it broke her heart. And of those early years, her mother was clearly her strongest influence. And one of the things that is so associated with Val is something her mother always said, which was dream big. And Val took that and other lessons from her mother, but took that to heart.
Vel has a ton of accomplishments. You know, we can't list and talk about all of them in our conversation today, but her political career started, officially, shall we say, when she was 32 years old. She became the first woman and the first Black person on the Milwaukee Common Council. So can you share more context about the atmosphere and culture she was working in 1956?
Yes, the 1950s on some levels could as well be the 18th century in terms of how different it is from today. And I grew up in the 50s, younger, but it's hard, I think, sometimes to appreciate what that culture was like for women and for Black people, but particularly women. For instance, there was not the approval of oral contraceptives until the 1960s, I think. Betty Friedan's The Feminist Mystique was not until the 1960s. And interestingly, it wasn't until 1974, we're talking 22 years after Vel was first elected, that women could have their own bank account or credit card. And so the 50s were a complicated decade, coming off of World War II. Economic prosperity in many ways, but the life for a lot of women and people of color was very different. And after the war, women were expected to go home and make babies.
And, you touched upon some of the atmosphere for women and then for Black people. And Vel obviously has a lot of compounded discrimination that she had experienced long before, intersectionality had been a common word, right?
Exactly.
Can you share a little more about that? Because you had a conversation with her about what stood out to her the most about that.
Well, interestingly, I did a feature on Vel in 2005. Hard to believe that's almost 20 years ago. And I had the good fortune to really, I drove her around, we had interviews, we spent some time together. And I would go to events where she would be, like community brainstorming, where she would be moderating. And we'd have lunch and, conversations. And at one point, I asked her, because she was known as the first woman, the first African American, I said, well, what was the hardest breakthrough? And initially, she just kind of, thought about it and just said, it was difficult, so to speak. And then a week or two later, at the community brainstorming, she comes back to me. She says, I've been thinking about that, and I really want to clarify. And then she talked about Shirley Chisholm, who is a African-American woman legislator from New York, who also ran for president in the 60s. And she was friends with Vel. I mean, there weren't that many women African-American politicians, and so they all knew each other. And Vel said, Shirley and I talked about this, and you're Black. Of course you're Black. And people know you're Black, and they don't forget that. But you're also a woman. But usually once I was in a position, they kind of forgot that I was a Black woman. She said, but they never, ever, ever forgot I was a woman.
So powerful, right? And sad that that's the takeaway.
Yes. Although interestingly, misogyny was ever present from the moment she stepped foot into the Common Council chambers. A lot of stories there. But it was really the issue of her being an African-American politician. That was the issue that really led to sort of concerns about her personal safety and the safety of her children. So while one was ever present and aggravating, it did not rise to the level of physically threatening her. And that wasn't true around the open housing marches.
Right. Let's talk about the marches. Obviously, it's one of her key legacies is the open housing legislation. And I feel like most people know the marches and have a certain snapshot in their head, especially if they weren't alive during that time. Like we see the same kind of handful of photographs, right? But Vel was trying to act on this long before the marching tactic became enacted, right?
Oh, she was the first person to introduce the open housing legislation. And it was in 1962. We're talking, 5 years before the open housing marches. In 1962, she first introduced open housing legislation, which would prohibit discrimination against African Americans in terms of renting and buying homes, which is very common at the time. Open discrimination. And I believe it was like 15-1. She was the only person who voted in favor of it. And there were years where it wasn't even discussed. She would bring up the resolution, no discussion, there'd be a vote. She would be the only person in support of the legislation.
And then eventually down the road in 67, she throws herself behind the tactic championed by Father James Groppe here and the local NAACP Youth Council, which was the public demonstrations. And I feel like this is lost in some of the snapshots, how extensive it was, how dramatic.
Well, in the mid-60s is when just everything exploded. And 1967 nationally was sort of this national unrest. There were, uprisings in Newark, Detroit. They called the troops into Detroit, Lyndon B. Johnson. And Father Groppe, shortly before that, had started the demonstrations for open housing. Groppe and the Youth Council were sort of an in the streets. Val was working with the politicians on the legislation. And Groppe, they came to Val and said, listen, we want to take this up as an issue. They'd been doing other issues around school desegregation, the Eagles Club, and their discriminatory practices. And they said, Val, we want to take this up. And Val said, go right ahead. She wasn't always out there in the demonstrations because she was acutely aware of the different roles at times. But it was in 67 when things just went kind of crazy. I mean, I don't quite know how to describe it, but that was when, in line with all the different uprisings in Newark, Detroit, Milwaukee had its own.
As we know Vel, we obviously identify her with Milwaukee, with Wisconsin, but her impact on the national stage is also really good too. And you go into her roles in the DNC both in 1958 and the 1960 conventions. Can you explain kind of how Vel set herself apart on the national scale here?
Well, it's fascinating. And again, a lot of it had to do with open housing. That's always been both locally and nationally her political marker, her main issue. But in 58, she was elected to the Democratic National Committee, first African-American woman. And then 2 years later, at the convention when Kennedy was nominated. So, not surprisingly, there was lots of discussion and floor fights over the platform. And there was a push for a strong civil rights platform as part of the Democratic Party platform. And you had your Southern Dems, the sort of segregationists, who said, oh, no, we can't adopt this civil rights platform. You're going to lose the South. This is government-enforced social equality. And they were adamantly opposed. And Val was on the committee, and one of the lessons here is don't ever get into a political fight with Val. She was so smart, and she always had a good response. So she says to the senator, well, how can you expect the world to, respect us if we don't even enforce equality here at home? But then more importantly, she said something that I think actually remains one of Vel's enduring markers of her beliefs. And she said, listen, it's more important to do the right thing. Luckily, the civil rights platform carried the day, and Kennedy won the election because the Southern segregationists said, oh, no, you're going to lose the election if you adopt this. But they didn't.
You're listening to Lake Effect on WUWM. I'm Audrey Nowakowski speaking with Barbara Miner about her Milwaukee Magazine article on Vel Phillips. So, Barbara, you mentioned that Vel always thought it's more important to do the right thing. And I think it's kind of a through line for Vel in that throughout her whole career and all the challenges she faced, like there's the resilience, there's the tenacity, there's the quiet leadership by example. And she was many things, obviously, including proud, but she kept her personal life quite private, right?
Yes. Understandably, as a politician and as a woman. But one of the things that I think it's really important to get into about Val, in terms of her do the right thing, to her dying day, she supported marriage equality. She supported a woman's right to choose. She supported LGBTQ. She supported, school desegregation. She strongly supported public schools and opposed the voucher program. You name an issue. She was a Bernie Sanders big supporter. You name an issue, and she came down on what, in hindsight, almost everyone recognizes was the right thing.
We, of course, have been talking about her local impact here in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, but let's talk about kind of how we're finally giving her flowers, and more publicly, right? There's a statue at the state capitol and the Vel Phillips Plaza here in Milwaukee. So how are these public and accessible spaces designed to reflect her?
It is important, I think, that she's finally getting her due, and there's a lot of reasons behind that. And one of the things I discovered in this article and over time was how well she was known at the statewide level. I mean, I know her here in Milwaukee, but a dorm was named after her in Madison. The James Madison High School is now the Vel Phillips Memorial High School. She's well known around the state and in Madison. Why is she getting her due? Lots of different reasons. One, the 100th year. After a century, I think people take notice. But also there's an interesting story of what happened in Madison, because it was the George Floyd protests. COVID, George Floyd, that was a difficult time on many, many levels. And during one of the protests in Madison, and this had been true across the country of different statues and monuments being torn down. In the South, this was primarily Confederate segregationists. Well, in Madison, they tore down two statues. One was Lady Forward, who represents the state, motto, and the other was a Norwegian American who was an abolitionist. But interestingly, Michael Johnson, who's head of the Dane County Boys and Girls Club, he decided to go talk to the protesters. And that was a very smart move, rather than just assuming they did, what they did, why they did. He said, I'm going to talk to them. And he found that, beneath the rage, beneath the anger, beneath the confusion, they had a really, really valid point that there were absolutely no statues of people of color at the Capitol. And so Michael said, this is right. We should do something about it. So that began the campaign around the statue of Vel Phillips at the state capitol. And here in Milwaukee, Malali Coggs, the alderperson, has a lot to do with really making sure that Vel got her due. There was the renaming of 4th Street to the Vel R. Phillips Drive. And then there was this pretty dingy corner there at 4th in Wisconsin, and it was city-owned. It's like, oh, what are we going to do with this? And ultimately, someone had the good sense to say, well, yeah, let's do a plaza, and let's name it after Vel.
Barbara Miner is a writer and photographer in Milwaukee who wrote about Vel Phillips in Milwaukee Magazine. She spoke with Lake Effect's Audrey Nowakowski last year. And that wraps up today's show. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'm Joy Powers. If you missed any of Lake Effect this week, you can find all of our conversations at WUWM.com. If you'd like to take the show on the go, you can download the Lake Effect podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Tomorrow on Lake Effect, we'll explore what kinds of stories are lurking in the archives of Milwaukee Mysteries at the Public Library. Plus, Bubbler Talk investigates the history of the Milwaukee Fire and Police Academy. Thanks so much for joining us right here on listener-supported 89.7 WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.